Sunday Night has developed a strong relationship with Barry Gibb, the Bee Gees' older brother, during the past few years. Andy Gibb was more than simply a musical sensation. He was the golden child of the late 1970s, with an irresistible charisma and a voice that could stop you cold. To millions, he was the ideal package: young, talented, and loved. However, underneath that shiny exterior was a much more precarious reality. A tale with dark undertones that celebrity could never erase. Even Barry, the sibling who elevated him into the spotlight, would one day reveal that deep down, Andy was radically different from who the public perceived him to be. And this reality would affect the way the world remembers the Gibb family forever. Barry Gibb's rise to fame. The Bee Gees, a group that influenced contemporary pop culture in ways that few could have predicted, are inextricably linked to Barry Gibb's name. Barry was more than simply a singer and composer. He was the oldest of the Gibb brothers. He guided their sound over decades of shifting musical environments as the visionary and anchor. Barry had a knack for reinventing himself, from sweet ballads to dance hits that shaped a generation. However, behind all the honors and praise, there was a complexity to his life that few people really comprehended. He was crucial in putting his younger brother, Andy Gibb, in the public eye, and introduced him to a world of admiration and celebrity. However, in the end, that same popularity would prove to be both a blessing and a burden, influencing both of their lives in ways that were both devastating and inspirational. Born in Douglas, on the Isle of Man, on the 1st of September 1946, Barry Allen Crompton Gibb was surrounded by music from an early age. When his family migrated to Manchester, Barry began developing a love for songwriting and performance. However, everything really started to take form when the family moved to Australia in 1958. The transfer provided Barry and his brothers, Robin and Maurice, a new start in a new nation. And it was then that their combined love for music turned from a childhood interest into a professional goal. Barry's first band experience occurred early. When he was 9 years old, he joined Robin, Maurice, and a few buddies to establish the Rattlesnakes, a skiffle group. Even in these embryonic years, Barry stood out as the creative power, producing songs and leading the ensemble. One of the most successful bands in music history was formally established when the Rattlesnakes disbanded and reorganized as the Bee Gees, short for Brothers Gibb. There were difficulties in the early years. The Bee Gees spent the 1960s establishing themselves, and their big break came in 1967 with the publication of New York mining disaster, 1941. The hit ascended the charts globally and exposed the world to their haunting harmonies and Barry's unique personality as lead. The late 1960s and early 1970s saw a series of achievements. Many musicians found it difficult to keep up with the fast changes in the music industry by the mid-1970s. The Bee Gees, however, remade themselves altogether. Barry's falsetto, formerly a tool he had experimented with, became the focus of their new sound. I usually don't look at anything. I don't see or keep an eye on myself. I don't read. The timing couldn't have been better. In addition to redefining the Bee Gees, the 1977 release of the Saturday Night Fever album helped make disco a worldwide sensation by taking over airwaves, clubs, and charts all over the world. The effect was astounding. Over 40 million copies of this soundtrack were sold globally, making it one of the best-selling CDs ever. Barry became the distinctive voice of a time because of his brilliant lyricism and soaring vocals. The Bee Gees were cultural icons, in addition to being well-liked. Their music provided people all around the world with a soundtrack for their lives, capturing the spirit of the late 1970s. Barry's efforts as a songwriter were just as renowned as his performances. He is one of the most prolific composers in musical history, having written or co-written over 16 songs that reached the top of the Billboard Hot 100 over the years. Not only did the Bee Gees sing his tunes, but other musicians like Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton also found success with them. The accolades and acknowledgement came next. In recognition of their unmatched influence on music, Barry and his brothers were admitted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1994. They were admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 3 years later, and Barry was awarded one of the greatest personal accolades in 2018. He was knighted by the Queen for his contributions to music and charity. In 2022, the Australian government acknowledged him as an honorary companion of the Order of Australia, highlighting the enduring bond between Barry and the nation where the Bee Gees originated. However, while the numbers and honors provide a portion of the narrative, they fall short of capturing the heart of Barry's ascent. His career was about resiliency, flexibility, and vision, rather than just records sold or charts conquered. He led the Bee Gees through several reinventions while bearing the burden of leadership. He was the glue that held the family acts together, even as fame challenged their connections. And in doing so, Barry's life became characterized by his own successes and by the way he boosted people around him, particularly his younger brother, Andy. Yet, that ascension to legendary stature had its shadows. For Barry, personal struggles were constantly entwined with accomplishment, and for Andy, the celebrity that Barry helped him discover would become a double-edged sword. Most fans never really witnessed the hidden tale of vulnerability, strain, and heartbreak that lay behind the dazzling headlines and record-breaking figures. Barry's private battles. Behind the blinding lights of fame and the mountain of records sold, Barry Gibb carried a weight that prosperity could never obliterate. He had to cope with deep bereavement, unspoken hardships, and the negative aspects of being in the spotlight. Fans perceived Barry as a self-assured performer with a soaring falsetto, but those closest to him understood that he faced silent struggles that molded him as a man and an artist. Loss has been Barry's worst burden in life. The Bee Gees were brothers, not simply a band. In addition to being related by blood, Barry, Robin, and Maurice shared a creative bond that propelled them from obscurity to international recognition. Even though their relationship was often put to the test, it remained the foundation of all they accomplished. And then, in a sad twist of destiny, Barry became the only surviving brother of the Bee Gees. Barry's spiritual twin brother, Maurice Gibb, died unexpectedly in 2003 due to surgical complications. Both emotionally and professionally, his passing was heartbreaking. Whenever conflicts arose between Barry and Robin, Maurice was always the group's mediator. There was an unfillable void in his absence. Barry characterized those years as a haze of anguish, confessing that he struggled to find purpose in music without the sibling who had been alongside him from boyhood. Tragedy returned less than 10 years later when Robin passed away in 2012 following a protracted fight with cancer. A significant portion of the Bee Gees' sound had been shaped by Robin's distinctive voice and dramatic flair. Thus, Barry lost both another brother and a creative collaborator who had shared his vision for over 50 years. Standing alone on stage in the years that followed, Barry admits to experiencing the terrible reality of being the last guy standing. Despite the adulation of millions and a career few could equal, there were occasions when he claimed he felt absolutely alone. After all, family could never be replaced by fame. Barry's troubles, however, didn't begin in adulthood. Even as a youngster, he had wounds that were rarely talked of. In subsequent interviews, Barry disclosed that as a young child he had barely avoided a traumatic event. Even though he was able to flee, the incident had a lasting effect on him that persisted for years. Barry saw music as more than simply a job. It served as a haven and a means of processing feelings and anxieties that words couldn't always adequately convey. While he rarely dwelled on the episode publicly, it was confirmation that Barry's route to success was paved not just with opportunity, but also with suffering that tested his perseverance from the very beginning. The demands of a field that might be as erratic as it was lucrative presented him with an additional external hurdle as he dealt with his own pain and the shadows of his upbringing. With the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, the Bee Gees achieved incredible success in the late 1970s, but the cultural tide quickly turned. The disco backlash was already underway by 1979. The most notorious incident occurred in July 1979 during Chicago's Disco Demolition Night, when thousands of disco records were detonated in the midst of a baseball field. The Bee Gees became the unwitting faces of disco's alleged excess, despite the fact that the ploy was directed at the genre as a whole. Their image was reduced almost instantly to a parody of falsetto voices and polyester clothing. It was a devastating blow for Barry, who had always placed a high value on songwriting. Behind the scenes, he grappled with the frustration of being confined to a particular genre. In the public perception, the Bee Gees were suddenly labeled as relics of a craze, despite the fact that they had been writing popular songs long before disco and would continue to do so long after. Radio exposure decreased, record sales declined, and invitations to important events stopped coming in. They were now viewed as outsiders by the business that had formerly praised them as icons. Barry confessed years later that this era strained his trust in himself and his profession. He wondered if the Bee Gees would ever be seen outside of the disco ball. Yet, resilience was in his nature. Even in those trying years, Barry continued to compose prolifically, producing songs for other artists who went on to top charts in their own right. One of his distinguishing qualities was his capacity to adjust and continue producing even when public opinion shifted. Nevertheless, the pain of rejection following such enormous triumph never completely vanished. It was yet another silent burden he bore, a reminder that celebrity could be as ephemeral as it was seductive. Barry's life was a blend of remarkable achievement and equally extraordinary hardships. He accomplished everything few could dream of, from global notoriety to creative immortality, and distinctions that placed him among the greatest musicians in history. However, the shadows were visible to those who peered more closely. The anguish of losing brothers who had shared his every step, the secret pain of childhood trauma, and the constant strain of navigating a business eager to both praise and punish its stars. And yet, even with all of this, Barry moved ahead, carrying the memories of the brothers who had stood with him and the youngest brother, Andy, whom he had once ushered into the spotlight. Barry didn't only help influence Andy's career. He opened the door that allowed him to shine. What followed was a spectacular climb that attracted people across the world. However, as Barry would subsequently acknowledge, Andy's tale was just as, if not more complicated than his own. Because Andy was thrown into that environment at a far earlier age than Barry, who was aware of the weight of celebrity and the loneliness that may accompany it. And the route he followed, first led by Barry's encouragement, would result in both enormous success and tragic outcomes. Andy Gibb's quick ascent. Andy Gibb is the youngest of the Gibb siblings, having been born on the 5th of March, 1958. He and his family relocated to Australia when he was just 6 months old, and it was there that his brothers, Barry, Robin, and Maurice, would start paving the way for their future legendary status. It was both exciting and frightening to grow up in the shadow of 3 elder brothers who were already pursuing musical goals. But he most admired Barry out of all of them. In addition to being an elder brother, Barry served as Andy's mentor and role model. By his adolescent years, Andy was already following the same ambition that had motivated his siblings. Unlike the Bee Gees, who had established their footing via harmonies and collaborative songwriting, Andy sought to perform on his own. He developed his voice and stage appearance while performing in pubs and clubs in Ibiza and eventually returned to Australia. His attractiveness was instant, youthful, gorgeous, and charming, since he possessed the innate attraction that pulled others together. More than that, though, he brought with him the promise of the family name and Barry's direction, which would soon open doors far broader than he could have achieved on his own. In 1977, that door opened. Andy recorded and published his first song, "I Just Want to Be Your Everything," with Barry's assistance. The song, which Barry wrote especially for Andy, has the recognizable Gibb sound, but a unique freshness. Not only did it do well, but it immediately rose to the top of the Billboard Hot 100. Andy moved from being the youngest Gibb sibling to becoming a pop sensation almost immediately. The triumph didn't end there. His follow-up song, "Love is Thicker Than Water," also achieved #1 in early 1978, demonstrating Andy wasn't simply a one-hit wonder, riding on his brother's notoriety. That same year, he released "Shadow Dancing," another track co-written with Barry, Robin, and Maurice, which became his third consecutive #1 song. Andy Gibb established himself as a budding star and earned his position in music history when, at the age of 20, he became the youngest performer in American history to score 3 consecutive chart-topping songs. But his magnetism stretched beyond music. Andy was a mainstay on American television by the early 1980s. His youthful appearance, soft voice, and effortless charisma earned him a fan favorite while co-hosting the popular music show Solid Gold. He wasn't simply a performer. He was a television personality with a natural charisma that had people tuned in week after week. After Hollywood noticed, Andy started getting parts in stage musicals. He had one of his best performances in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, where his youthful enthusiasm and vocal prowess made him a perfect fit for the part. For a time, Andy's career appeared unstoppable. He had the skill, the beauty, the charisma, and most significantly, the backing of Barry, who continued to stand behind him, creating songs and directing his career. Fans loved him, and the media praised him as one of the most promising rising talents of the late 1970s. Andy was the dream in many respects. In a matter of years, he had gone from obscurity to worldwide fame, doing feats that even the most seasoned performers could only envy. However, while the public witnessed a self-assured young celebrity enjoying the pinnacle of success behind the scenes, Andy was starting to confront obstacles that would put him to the test in ways that fame could never prepare him for. Even though his work was taking off, his personal life was already falling apart in both obvious and subtle ways. Andy struggled with pressure, heartbreaks, and personal troubles that his notoriety appeared to only exacerbate. And as Barry would subsequently acknowledge, Andy's quick ascent was accompanied by a vulnerability that was impossible to overlook, a heartbreaking existence. For all of Andy Gibb's early success, his personal life presented a totally different narrative. Behind the confident smile and the whirlwind of chart-topping hits, Andy was a young man battling with sorrow, strained relationships, and fights that celebrity could only aggravate. His path was defined by highs that dazzled the world, but also by lows that slowly chipped away at him until they were difficult to ignore. Andy's first effort at having a family came at barely 18 years old. In July 1976, he married Kim Reeder, an Australian lady he had met while living there. The marriage was hasty and young, with the weight of Andy's goals and the expectations of the music industry already pushing down on him. By the time their daughter, Peta, was born in January 1978, Andy's career was flourishing in America. He was drawn into an unrelenting life of touring, recording, and public appearances rather than embracing parenthood. Only 2 years after getting married, in 1978, Andy and Kim filed for divorce because their marriage was unable to endure the stress. Emotional wounds resulted from the split. Though Andy enjoyed the notion of being a parent, the reality was more complex. He didn't spend much time with Peta throughout her early years due to distance, celebrity, and his own mounting difficulties. Kim subsequently revealed that she kept their kid away from the volatility of Andy's lifestyle, wanting to offer her a feeling of stability. Andy felt the weight of the absence. He often spoke of Peta with affection, yet there was always a tinge of sorrow in his comments, an understanding that his decisions had denied him the ability to be there in her life during those critical years. By the early 1980s, Andy appeared to find happiness once more in a romance that would turn out to be one of the most significant and terrible periods of his life. He first encountered actress Victoria Principal in 1981. She was already well known for her part in the television show Dallas. For a while, their relationship seemed to offer Andy a new sense of purpose. It was immediate and intense. Their connection was evident in the numerous photos of the two together. Magazines were obsessed with the youthful pop singer and the glitzy TV personality, and fans adored the match. However, there was more to the connection than meets the eye. Andy was already battling substance misuse, which conflicted with Victoria's commitment to her work and her orderly lifestyle. Andy struggled with uncontrollable pressures while she continued with her career. And the imbalance quickly weakened their relationship. Their relationship appeared to some in the media to be a marketing gimmick, a pairing of two celebrities at the pinnacle of their celebrity. But for Andy, it was much more than that. He was genuinely in love, and he was saddened when the relationship ended abruptly in 1982. Andy never truly healed from the separation, according to friends and relatives. Losing Victoria seemed to exacerbate all of his fears and increase his reliance on illegal drugs as a coping mechanism. Maurice, Robin, and Barry tried their best to help him. However, Andy found himself in a vicious cycle that was hard to escape. He was further driven into risky behaviors by the heartache, the demands of celebrity, and the emptiness he frequently experienced in his personal life. His health began to suffer more and more. In the mid-1980s, Andy was hospitalized many times for chest problems and gastrointestinal troubles, ailments made worse by his substance misuse. Though he sought to stage comebacks, both musically and psychologically, his body was already deteriorating from years of strain. By the time he reached his late 20s, Andy's boyish appeal was shaded by the heaviness of someone who had lived much too quickly. In March 1988, Andy began complaining of acute chest problems at his home in Oxford, England. The harm was already done when he was taken to the hospital, and Andy Gibb sadly died on the 10th of March, 1988, 5 days after turning 30. Although physicians noted that years of substance usage had gravely affected his body, the official diagnosis was myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle. Fans around were stunned by the news. Andy, the attractive Gibb brother who personified prosperity and charm, had appeared to many to be perennially young. His unexpected passing served as a sobering reminder of both the negative aspects of celebrity and the consequences of unsolved personal issues. Andy was buried in Los Angeles' Forest Lawn Memorial Park, the same cemetery where innumerable other Hollywood icons are interred. Fans, other musicians, and co-workers who had collaborated with him sent him tributes in the days and weeks that followed. His music served as a reminder of the ability that was lost far too soon, particularly those early hits that shattered records. For Barry, Robin, and Maurice, Andy's death was more than just the loss of a sibling. It was the end of a dream they had all shared for their youngest brother. And for Barry, Andy's narrative would become one of the deepest causes of reflection in his own life. For as much as Barry cheered his brother's achievement, he also bore the weight. Barry would wonder for years what more might have been done in response to Andy's challenges, which were a family tragedy. The truth about Andy Gibb. Although Andy Gibb's life was frequently depicted through headlines, popular songs, and glitzy appearances, his true nature was far more complex. Beneath the persona of a pop star, there was a young guy battling pressures, fears, and a fragility that was only made worse by his notoriety. Andy was conscious of his elder brother's heritage from the start. It was intimidating to enter into the shadow of Barry, Robin, and Maurice, who had already made the Bee Gees one of the most successful bands in the world. Even though Andy shared their musical talent, he frequently questioned his own abilities. Andy relied significantly on his brothers, especially Barry, for creative guidance, in contrast to the Bee Gees, who established their fame via writing and producing. Andy had songs that propelled him to fame, but he still struggled with confidence. His modest dread that he wasn't standing on his own, but rather because of his brother's efforts, was strengthened by fame. He doubted his ability to write songs and was concerned. He was always insecure. Even though he was liked by his fans, Andy frequently found it difficult to perceive himself as more than the youngest Gibb sibling. Continuously comparing his accomplishments to the benchmarks established by three of the greatest artists in history, Andy's misgivings remained unabated despite his fame. It made them louder. As his fame surged, a habit that began in his late teens and increased over his years in the spotlight. It first appeared to be a means of meeting the demands of public appearances, recording, and touring. However, it quickly turned into something worse, a crutch he used to get away from emotions he couldn't get rid of. By the early 1980s, Andy's addiction was no secret. It interrupted his career, harmed his relationships, and deteriorated his health. Friends, family, and even fans could see the toll it was taking, but breaking away remained exceedingly tough. Andy acknowledged the severity of his battle in an open appearance on Good Morning America, stating, "I've been to hell and back. I believe, literally, I had a really serious nervous breakdown. I had everything I wanted, and I simply blew it all up." Those statements represented the agony he faced with every day, swinging between moments of hope and times of relapse that felt difficult to overcome. Beyond the addiction, Andy carried with him an even more agonizing feeling of emotional loneliness. Millions of people adored him, yet he frequently felt alone. Fame, rather than healing his loneliness, just appeared to magnify it. There was a gap between his private and public selves as a result of the continual attention, performance pressure, and desire to uphold an image. He struggled with anxiety and depression, which were not as well recognized in the 1980s as they are now. This meant enduring silent anguish while disguising it on stage with charm and flair, only to revert to personal hardships once the lights went off. He was compassionate, sensitive, and sincerely affectionate, but also someone who felt things too passionately, who might be crushed by the mere weight of his own feelings. A significant portion of Andy's tale has been assembled through memories, interviews, and, subsequently, Matthew Hild's book, Arrow Through the Heart. The book sheds light on the unseen facets of Andy's life, creating an image of a man admired by many, yet unable to find peace inside himself. He was often described as cherished, yet lost. A young celebrity who appeared to have everything yet struggled to deal with the unrelenting demands of fame and was overcome by thoughts of inadequacy. For Barry, Andy's troubles were not distant, they were extremely personal. As the older brother, he had always felt a duty for Andy, bringing him into the profession and helping him discover his voice. However, Barry felt powerless as he witnessed Andy's descent into addiction and heartache. He eventually expressed his sorrow, saying simply, "I'd rather have my brother's back and no hits at all." It was a statement that expressed sorrow not just for Andy, but also for Robin and Maurice, whose passing would make Barry the sole remaining Gibb. Barry talked candidly about how painful it was to watch Andy's potential dashed and how he wished he had done more to save him. Remember to like and subscribe. You can follow the stories of your favorite celebrities by clicking on the next video that appears on the screen. See you there.